Institute raises little predators.
Breaking news, a dark family secret is exposed.
It's like the epitome of evil. Breaks my heart to think about the girls.
Gothard turned every father into a cult leader and every home into an island.
Today, Josh was sentenced to 151 months in prison, and that's nearly 13 years behind bars.
Imagine building a multi-million-dollar empire on the promise of absolute purity, only to have your entire legacy dismantled by the very secrets you swore to bury. For over a decade, the Duggar family was the golden goose of reality television. 19 kids, matching outfits, and a seemingly unbreakable code of wholesome values that mesmerized millions of viewers. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the stage lights go out in the sprawling Arkansas compound? The truth is far darker than a few cancelled television shows. Behind the forced smiles and awkward side hugs was a carefully orchestrated machine designed for total control, psychological manipulation, and unprecedented profit. We are talking about buried police reports, financial hostage situations, and explosive allegations that never made it into the mainstream media. The wholesome, picture-perfect facade was nothing but a fragile, terrifying mask hiding a literal house of horrors. If you are new here and you want the raw truth, hit that like button and subscribe to Daniel. Research right now. We dig deep into the stories the networks tried to erase, and we do not hold back. To understand how the Duggar family managed to fool the world for so long, you have to look past the large dining tables and the matching denim skirts. You have to look at the corporate machinery that kept them on the air. When 19 kids and counting first exploded onto the scene, the network knew they had struck absolute gold. But insider reports suggest that the network executives knew exactly what they were getting into from day one. Rumours claim that long before the major accusations surfaced regarding the eldest Duggar son, there were whispers in the local Arkansas community, police reports, strange late-night incidents, and panicked phone calls that mysteriously vanished into thin air. Exclusive theories from former production insiders point to the existence of a high-level, extremely expensive Hollywood fixer quietly kept on retainer. This fixer's sole job was allegedly to sweep the local county records, intimidate small-town journalists, and ensure that Bob Duggar's pristine, the image remained entirely untouched. Whenever a crack appeared in the family's armour, this shadowy figure would supposedly swoop in, flashing network cash and ironclad non-disclosure agreements to silence anyone who dared to speak up. It is a terrifying thought that a family promoting extreme biblical morals was allegedly being protected by the exact same ruthless Hollywood tactics used to shield corrupt politicians and untouchable moguls. But that was not the whole story. While the network was allegedly burying the family's darkest secrets, Bob was busy building an inescapable financial prison for his own children. On television, Bob played the goofy, thrifty patriarch who bought used cars and shopped in bulk. Behind closed doors, he was a ruthless, calculating CEO holding his entire bloodline financially hostage. As the show generated millions of dollars per season, the children who were the actual stars of the series never saw a single dime of that money. When the kids turned 18, instead of receiving a paycheck for their years of labour, they were reportedly forced to sign terrifyingly complex contracts at the kitchen table, handing over their life rights to their father. But recent insider reports hint at a financial web far more sinister than just unpaid wages. Financial sleuths and exclusive theories suggest that Bob may have funneled millions of reality TV dollars into secret offshore bank accounts and untraceable shell companies, all cleverly disguised as tax-exempt religious ministries. By hoarding the wealth in these untouchable accounts, Bob ensured that even if his older children wanted to escape the oppressive, cult-like environment, they literally could not afford a bus ticket out of town. He starved them of resources, making sure they remained entirely dependent on his approval for a roof over their heads, a vehicle to drive, or even food to feed their own newborns. And what happened next would shock everyone, because total financial control was only the beginning of the nightmare. To keep his children in line, Bob relied heavily on the teachings of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, an extreme controversial organisation that demands absolute, unquestioning submission to the father. The IBLP taught that any deviation from Jim Bob's rules would invite literal demonic attacks into their lives. The children were raised in an environment of extreme paranoia, entirely cut off from the outside world, internet access, and unapproved secular media. They were taught that their only value lay in their absolute obedience. But rumours suggest that not every child broke under the pressure. In fact, an exclusive, mind-blowing theory has been quietly circulating in the darkest corners of reality television forums. Reports claim there may have been a phantom Duggar. Whispers from locals suggest that at one point there was another child in the household, perhaps an adopted ward or an extended family member who fiercely rebelled against the strict, suffocating dress codes and forced arranged marriages. According to this theory, when this child refused to conform, Jim Bob entirely scrubbed their existence from the family's public narrative. They were supposedly sent away to a highly secretive religious reprogramming camp, erased from the television show's continuity and never spoken of again. While this remains a deeply guarded rumour, it perfectly aligns with Jim Bob's notorious ability to cut off anyone who threatened his multi-million-dollar brand. As the years went on, the paranoia inside the Duggar compound allegedly reached terrifying new heights. Jim Bob knew that his empire was built on a fragile foundation of lies, and if the network ever pulled the plug, the fallout would be catastrophic. Reports claim that a significant portion of the family's hidden wealth was poured into the sprawling Arkansas property to turn it into an impenetrable fortress. Local contractors have supposedly whispered about massive, unpermitted excavations happening late at night behind the main house. The rumour is that Jim Bob ordered the construction of a massive underground bunker complex fully stocked with years of provisions, off-grid, power systems and secure communication lines. This doomsday compound was allegedly designed not just for the end of the world, but to physically isolate the loyal inner circle of the family when the inevitable media storm finally hit. He wanted a place where the authorities, the journalists, and the angry former fans could never reach them. The thought of a reality television patriarch building a sinister underground vault just to hide from the consequences of his own actions is chilling, but for a man who demanded absolute control over every breath his family took, it is entirely believable. The walls were closing in, the fixer could no longer bury the escalating legal issues, and the golden children were slowly beginning to wake up from their lifelong nightmare. The moment the glass house shattered was not brought on by an angry outsider or a sudden media expose. It came from the very daughters Jim Bob had spent a lifetime training to be perfectly, undeniably silent. For years, the Duggar girls were paraded on national television as the ultimate prizes of purity. They were the smiling, soft-spoken centerpieces of a brand that demanded their total submission. But as Jill and Jinger began to step outside the heavily guarded perimeter of their father's control, the illusion violently cracked. Breaking away from a reality television empire is hard enough, but breaking away from an extreme isolated belief system while the entire world watches is a psychological nightmare. Insider reports suggest that the escape was far more dangerous than anyone ever realised. When Jill and her husband Derek finally decided to confront Jim Bob over years of unpaid wages, they were not just met with a simple denial. They were allegedly met with a terrifying campaign of psychological warfare. Rumours claim that Jim Bob, realising he was losing his grip on his most profitable assets, went to unimaginable lengths to crush their rebellion. Exclusive theories from sources close to the family suggest he hired high-priced private investigators to quietly shadow his own daughters. These shadow operatives were allegedly tasked with monitoring their daily movements, intercepting their private communications, and digging up any secular missteps that could be used to humiliate them in the eyes of their deeply religious fan base. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. What happened next would shock everyone, because Jim Bob allegedly had a weapon far more destructive than private investigators. During their time in the Institute in Basic Life Principles, the Duggar children were frequently subjected to intense private counselling sessions where they were forced to confess every impure thought, every doubt and every mistake they ever made. According to a deeply guarded, exclusive theory circulating among former church insiders, Jim Bob secretly recorded these intensely vulnerable confessions. He allegedly kept a locked digital vault of these tapes hidden deep within the Arkansas compound. When Jill and Jinger started speaking out, rumors suggest Jim Bob threatened to leak these heavily edited, out-of-context audio files to the press. The alleged goal was to absolutely destroy their public credibility, ruin their husbands' careers, and paint his own daughters as unstable, rebellious liars who had fallen away from their faith. He was holding their darkest, most private childhood fears hostage to protect his television money. The psychological toll of knowing your own father might weaponize your childhood trauma against you forced the older sisters to undergo extreme mental deprogramming. Leaving the cult environment meant untangling decades of brainwashing, all while dodging the legal and emotional traps Jim Bob continuously laid at their feet. To survive this terrifying game of chess, the estranged siblings had to go completely underground. You have to remember, these were young women who grew up without unmonitored internet access or private cell phones. But reports claim that a secret encrypted network of burner phones was quietly established among the older Duggar sisters. This hidden communication ring allegedly allowed them to coordinate their stories, share legal advice, and warn each other about Jim Bob's next moves without his surveillance network catching on. They were plotting their liberation right under the nose of the man who thought he saw everything. Insiders suggest that this burner phone network was partially funded and supported by an underground coalition of former reality TV stars and IBLP survivors who operate secret safe houses for young men and women trying to escape cult-like television families. This clandestine group allegedly provided the Duggar girls with emergency funds, secular legal counsel, and the intense psychological support they desperately needed to stand up in a court of law. It was a covert operation happening completely out of sight from the TLC. Camera crews who were still busy filming the family's manufactured happy spin-off shows. And while the daughters were fighting for their freedom, the very foundation of the show's most popular storylines was allegedly being exposed as a complete transactional fraud. The world tuned in to watch the famous Duggar courtships, believing they were witnessing pure, innocent romances blossoming under strict biblical guidelines. But exclusive insider theories paint a sickeningly different picture. Rumors suggest that the entire courtship process was nothing more than a highly orchestrated, lucrative business transaction between Jim Bob and the groom's families. These were not natural romances, they were arranged marriages negotiated in secret backrooms for maximum television ratings. Reports claim that Jim Bob required prospective sons-in-law to sign ironclad, multi-page non-disclosure agreements before they were even allowed to hold a Duggar daughter's hand on camera. If the groom's family had their own businesses or ministries, cross-promotional contracts were allegedly drawn up. Jim Bob was essentially trading his daughter's futures for guaranteed spin-off seasons, higher speaking fees, and expanded influence within his religious network. The girls were just pawns on a very expensive chessboard, forced to smile and read their lines while their father cashed the checks. When the truth about this financial manipulation and the unpaid wages finally started making its way to the network executives, absolute panic allegedly set in. For years, TLC had looked the other way, profiting off the wholesome image, while actively ignoring the deeply disturbing red flags. But as Jill and Derek prepared to file actual legal motions demanding compensation, the network knew they were sitting on a ticking time bomb of labour violations. Rumours from former production staff claim that a massive late-night shredding party took place at the network's corporate headquarters. Terrified executives allegedly ordered the destruction of thousands of pages of early production, notes, unedited raw footage, and internal memos that proved they knew Jim Bob was withholding money and maintaining a hostile, coercive environment for the children. They were desperately trying to scrub their own fingerprints off the crime scene before the federal authorities started asking questions. The network was preparing to throw Jim Bob completely under the bus, distancing themselves from the man they had helped turn into a multi-millionaire untouchable mogul. The ultimate facade was rapidly decaying, and the walls of the Arkansas compound were finally starting to cave in. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. and it would involve the family's darkest, most unspeakable secret finally boiling over into the public eye. The final catastrophic blow to the Duggar empire did not come from a rebellious daughter or a leaked financial document. It came from the very person Jim Bob had spent his entire life protecting at all costs. For years, the eldest son was positioned as the heir apparent to the family's lucrative, ultra-conservative brand. He was the golden child, the one who was supposed to carry the torch of their extreme religious lifestyle into the next generation. But behind the perfectly parted hair and the televised family prayers, he was allegedly hiding a digital trail so deeply disturbing that it would eventually bring federal authorities straight to the compound's doorstep. When the federal accusations finally surfaced regarding his unspeakable online activities, the illusion of the wholesome Christian household completely disintegrated overnight. This was no longer about unpaid wages or strict dress codes. This was a massive, undeniable legal nightmare that carried severe federal prison time. And what happened next would shock everyone, because Jim Bob's reaction to this the crisis was not to protect his younger children or cooperate with authorities. Instead, insider reports suggest he immediately went to war against the American justice system to protect his brand. Rumours claim that within hours of the federal raid, Jim Bob activated a massive, shadowy legal defence fund, pulling millions of dollars from those secretive offshore ministry accounts we talked about earlier. Exclusive theories suggest that the patriarch desperately tried to engineer a highly complex, aggressive distraction strategy. Insiders whisper that high-priced tech consultants were quietly brought in to fabricate a narrative about a mysterious rogue hacker. The plan was supposedly to flood the internet with reports claiming the eldest son had been framed by an international cyber syndicate targeting conservative Christian families. Jim Bob allegedly poured unimaginable amounts of money into private forensics teams, hoping to manufacture just enough reasonable doubt to keep his golden child out of federal prison and save his cancelled television spin-offs. But the digital footprint was undeniable. The arrogance of believing you can outsmart federal investigators from a rural Arkansas compound is staggering, but that is exactly what happens when a man lives inside a reality distortion field fueled by 2 decades of network television money. He genuinely believed his wealth and his manufactured religious authority could make federal indictments magically disappear. But that was not the whole story, because while Jim Bob was allegedly burning through his secret millions to protect his eldest son, the network executives at TLC were executing a ruthless cut-and-run operation. Once the severe legal issues became public, the network knew they could no longer sweep this under the rug with a high-level Hollywood fixer. They immediately issued public statements, severing all ties and officially cancelling the lucrative spin-off series. But rumours suggest their exit was not as clean as they wanted the public to believe. An explosive insider theory claims that right before the cancellation was announced, TLC executives dispatched a team of crisis lawyers to the Duggar compound with a terrifying ultimatum. They allegedly offered Jim Bob a massive one-time hush money settlement. The catch? He had to sign an ironclad lifetime non-disclosure agreement promising never to reveal how much. The network actually knew about the early red flags, the financial abuse, and the dangerous psychological environment they had funded for years. The network was absolutely terrified that a desperate Jim Bob might turn state's evidence against them, exposing their corporate complicity in building his terrifying empire. According to these rumours, Jim Bob took the payout, ensuring his silence and allowing TLC to quietly walk away with their hands completely clean, leaving the shattered family to face the media firing squad entirely alone. As the eldest son was finally convicted and sent away to a federal facility, the sprawling Arkansas property transformed into something resembling a ghost town. The once bustling compound, heavily guarded by those alleged doomsday preparations, is now rumoured to be an intensely isolated, paranoid environment. With the television money permanently gone and the massive legal bills piling up, exclusive theories suggest Jim Bob has been quietly liquidating the family's assets through a maze of anonymous shell companies. Reports claim that large parcels of land, commercial real estate and used car lots are being secretly sold off to keep the patriarch's remaining financial empire afloat. But the most tragic part of this final collapse is the fate of the loyalists who never managed to escape. Whispers from local community members suggest that the younger children and the remaining faithful family members are essentially trapped inside a decaying fortress. Without the burner phones, the underground escape networks, or the financial means to leave, they are allegedly living under a deeply oppressive lockdown-style environment. Jim Bob, having lost his golden child and his global platform, has supposedly tightened his grip on whatever power he has left, enforcing the Extreme Institute in basic life. Principles mandates with more absolute authority than ever before. The ultimate tragedy of the 19 kids and counting empire is a story as old as time. There is a moment in every untouchable mogul's downfall where their absolute need for control becomes the exact mechanism that destroys them. Bob Duggar built a massive multi-million-dollar cage disguised as a wholesome, God-fearing home. He controlled the narrative, the bank accounts, the courtships and the cameras, but he applied that same relentless, reckless momentum to hiding his family's darkest, most destructive secrets, leaving a trail of broken children and digital breadcrumbs that eventually caught up to him. You cannot build a billionaire brand on extreme coercion and expect the truth to stay buried forever. Every secret tape, every silenced police report, and every unpaid contract ultimately formed the blueprint of his own destruction. The facade has entirely crumbled, and all that is left is the deafening silence of a broken family picking up the pieces in the shadows. Now I want to hear from you. Drop into the comments right now and let me know. Do you think the network executives knew exactly what was happening behind those closed doors for years and just kept filming to protect their massive profits? Or was Bob Duggar truly that much of a mastermind to fool an entire corporate television machine? I want to read your theories because the absolute silence from Hollywood producers on this issue is the most glaring piece of the puzzle no one is talking about. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to Daniel Research, and turn on notifications, because our next video goes into an exclusive, deeply guarded story about another untouchable reality television family that the networks are desperately trying to erase from the internet. I absolutely do not want to miss it.